My name is Liam Harris. I'm 27 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm just a regular guy who works in art, spends weekends hiking in the mountains, and occasionally collects antiques as a hobby. Nothing too fancy, just stuff that catches my eye at garage sales or thrift stores. But this story is about one particular find that changed everything. It started on a Saturday morning last summer. I'd driven out to a flea market about an hour away. The place was packed with vendors selling all kinds of junk, old tools, vinyl records, and even weird taxidermy. I was wandering through the aisles when I noticed a small booth tucked into the corner. An old man sat there, half hidden by the shadow of a canvas tarp. His booth wasn't like the others. It was dark, cluttered, and gave off a strange vibe. I don't know why I walked over. Something about the place just pulled me in. The man didn't greet me or make eye contact, just sat there silently. On the table in front of him were various objects, rusted coins, cracked figurines, and faded maps. But what caught my attention was a small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with intricate carvings covering its surface. The carvings looked ancient, symbols I couldn't recognize, almost like a mix of geometric shapes and runes. The wood was dark and smooth, like it had been handled 1,000 times. "How much for the box?" I asked. The old man's eyes darted up to meet mine. They were a dull gray, but something in them made me uneasy. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's not for you." That was weird. I mean, who says that when they're trying to sell stuff? But I felt stubborn. "Come on, I'll pay whatever you want," I insisted. He sighed, almost like he was giving in out of pity. $20, he said. "But listen to me, son. Don't open it. Just don't." I nodded, pretending to agree, but I was already too curious. As I handed him the cash, he muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded almost like a prayer or a warning. Back home, I put the box on my coffee table and stared at it. It felt heavier than it looked, like it was made of more than just wood. My curiosity was eating me alive. Why wouldn't he want me to open it? What could possibly be inside? That evening, I decided I'd had enough of wondering. I grabbed a small screwdriver and pried the box open. It made a faint cracking sound, like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, I found an old leather pouch tied with a thin cord. The pouch smelled strange, like a mix of damp earth and something metallic. My heart was racing as I untied the cord and poured the contents onto the table. A single object fell out, a pendant made of a dark, almost black metal. It was shaped like an eye, with a small red gem embedded in the center. The craftsmanship was unbelievable. Every detail was perfect. But the moment I touched it, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The room suddenly felt darker, like the shadows were creeping closer. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, but when I sat up, the noise stopped. My room was dead silent, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I glanced at the coffee table, where the box and pendant still sat. The red gem seemed to glow faintly, though I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started hearing faint whispers even when I was wide awake. They didn't sound like English or any language I recognized, just a constant, low murmur that made my skin crawl. Objects in my apartment began to move on their own. A picture frame would be tilted, or a chair would be slightly out of place. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, I came home from work and found the box open. The pendant was lying in the middle of the floor, even though I was sure I'd left it inside the box. That was the breaking point. I decided I needed to get rid of it. I grabbed the pendant, shoved it back into the pouch, and threw it into the dumpster behind my apartment. But that night, the whispers grew louder. They weren't faint anymore. They were clear, almost like someone was speaking directly into my ear. "You can't escape," a voice said. I froze. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a deep, guttural voice, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. When I turned around, there was no one there. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My head throbbed, and my body felt weak. It was as if the whispers from the night before had drained me. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but the unsettling feeling wouldn't leave me. Even the air in my apartment felt wrong. Heavier, colder, almost suffocating. I went to work, hoping a change of scenery would clear my head. But the whispers followed me. They were faint at first, blending into the hum of the office. But by lunchtime, I could hear them clearly again. It wasn't just random murmurs anymore. The voices were saying my name. Liam. Liam. My stomach churned, and I barely managed to eat. By the time I got home, I was a mess. My apartment felt darker than usual, even with all the lights on. I cautiously approached the coffee table, half expecting the pendant to be back. Thankfully, it wasn't there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every shadow in the room seemed to move, shifting just enough to make me doubt my own eyes. I tried distracting myself with TV, but my mind kept drifting back to the pendant. Why hadn't I listened to the old man's warning? Why had I opened the box? I told myself I had done the right thing by throwing it away, but deep down, I wasn't sure. That night, I locked every door and window in the apartment and double-checked them before going to bed. But around midnight, I woke up to a loud thud. It sounded like something had fallen in the living room. My heart raced as I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy flashlight, and slowly crept out of my bedroom. The living room was dark, but the streetlights outside cast faint streaks of light across the floor. At first, I didn't see anything out of place. Then, my eyes landed on the coffee table. My breath caught in my throat. The wooden box was there, wide open, and the pendant was lying beside it. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. I knew for a fact that I had thrown it away. There was no way it could have come back. My hand started to shake as I stepped closer. The red gem in the center of the pendant was glowing faintly, just like I'd imagined the first night. But now there was no mistaking it. It was real. The whispers started again, louder this time. They seemed to echo all around me, coming from every corner of the room. Liam, Liam, why did you leave me? The voice wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real, vibrating through the walls and floor. I dropped the flashlight and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more aggressive. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows stretching and twisting like living things. I grabbed the pendant and shoved it back into the box, slamming the lid shut. The whispers stopped instantly, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. I sat there for what felt like hours, clutching the box in my lap. I didn't know what to do. Throwing it away hadn't worked. Burning it felt like a bad idea. I didn't know if that would make things worse. The old man's words echoed in my mind, "Don't open it." I cursed myself for being so stupid. The next day, I decided to go back to the flea market. I needed to find the old man and make him take the box back. But when I arrived, his booth was gone. The spot where it had been was empty, as if he had never been there. I asked around, describing the man and his strange collection of items, but no one seemed to know who I was talking about. Feeling desperate, I started researching online, looking up anything I could about cursed objects and ancient symbols. I found forums where people shared stories about haunted items, but nothing quite like what I was experiencing. One thread caught my eye, a post about a similar pendant with a red gem. According to the post, The pendant was rumored to be tied to an ancient curse, one that bound itself to whoever opened its container. The only way to break the curse was to return the pendant to its original resting place, but no one seemed to know where that was. That night, I decided to try something new. I placed the box in the middle of my living room and surrounded it with salt, something I had read about online. I sat there for hours, staring at the box, waiting for something to happen. The whispers didn't come back, but the air in the room felt charged, like a storm was brewing. Around 2 a.m., the box started to rattle. At first, it was subtle, like something shifting inside. Then, it grew more violent, shaking so hard that it broke the circle of salt. The lid flew open, and the pendant shot out, landing at my feet. I stared at it, paralyzed with fear. The red gem was glowing brighter than ever, casting an eerie light across the room. The whispers returned, louder than before, and I realized something terrifying. The voices weren't just speaking to me, they were inside me. I stood there, frozen, staring at the pendant lying on the floor. The red gem pulsed like a heartbeat, casting an eerie glow that danced on the walls. The whispers in my head grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just murmurs anymore. They were words, commands. "Pick it up," they said. "You can't fight it." My hands trembled as I backed away, refusing to touch the cursed thing again. But the whispers didn't care about my fear. They became relentless, drilling into my mind until I felt like my skull might split open. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my head. "Enough," I screamed. "What do you want from me?" The room fell silent, the kind of silence that felt alive. Then, a deep, guttural voice answered, resonating from every corner of the room. "You set me free," it said. "Now you belong to me." I crawled backward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The pendant rose from the floor, hovering midair. The red gem burned brighter, and a dark, smoky figure began to form around it. It was humanoid, but its features were blurred, as if it were made of shadows. Its eyes, glowing like embers, locked onto mine. "You cannot run," it growled. "You cannot hide." I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, but the air around me thickened, slowing me down. It felt like wading through water. The shadowy figure followed, its movements slow but deliberate. Desperation took over. I grabbed the salt container from the counter and threw it at the figure. The salt scattered in the air, and for a moment, the shadow recoiled, letting out an unearthly screech. Taking the chance, I bolted out of the apartment and into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I kept running, my legs burning and my lungs screaming for air, until I found myself in front of a church. I burst through the doors, startling an elderly priest who was arranging flowers near the altar. "Help me," I gasped. "Please, it's after me." The priest looked at me, his face calm but concerned. "What's after you, my son?" I told him everything: the flea market, the box, the pendant, the voices. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he walked to a side room and came back with a small vial of holy water and a Bible. "We need to confront this," he said firmly. "If you've brought something cursed into this world, it must be dealt with immediately." I wasn't sure I believed in exorcisms or blessings, but I was desperate enough to try anything. The priest led me back to my apartment, where the air still felt oppressive. As soon as we stepped inside, the whispers returned. "Leave," they hissed. "He is ours." The priest ignored them, his expression steady. He sprinkled holy water around the room, reciting prayers in Latin. The whispers turned into screams, and the pendant, still on the floor, began to glow violently. The shadowy figure reappeared, larger and more menacing than before. The priest held up a crucifix, shouting, "Begone, servant of darkness." "You have no power here." The shadow lunged at him, but it recoiled as the holy water splashed onto it. The screams grew deafening, and the entire apartment seemed to shake. I pressed myself against the wall, too terrified to move. Finally, with one last scream, the shadow collapsed in on itself, vanishing into the pendant. The red gem dimmed, and the room fell silent. The priest picked up the pendant with a cloth and placed it back into the wooden box. "You must bury this," he said, his voice stern. "Somewhere far from people, where no one will ever find it." The next day, I drove hours into the mountains. I dug a deep hole and buried the box, making sure it was well covered. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. But deep down, I knew I would never truly be free. Even now, months later, I sometimes hear faint whispers when I'm alone. I can only hope that the cursed relic stays buried forever.